Hey YouTube, Poobslag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source game I'm making with Godot. You can find a link to the source code below if you want to see how all this stuff works. But this month I've been boosting performance on Android, the web, and desktop targets to make it run faster and smoother. I've also snuck in a few gameplay improvements that I found from a playtest of someone trying out the game. Let me show you what I did. So on Android, the game was running at 5 to 10 frames a second, really slow, which was confusing as heck, because just a few months ago I went through a wave of performance improvements, which knocked it all the way up to 60 frames a second. So what happened between then and now? I did a little digging and eventually traced the problem to a Godot upgrade. The game ran perfectly fine in Godot 3.2.3, but upgrading to Godot 3.3 made it run like crap on Android, and this was due to a new feature called sprite batching. Sprite batching is a really cool thing, which affects how Godot sends signals to your GPU, and it makes the game usually run faster, but something's wrong with it on Android, and it doesn't run so fast. Disabling it fixed my Android problem, but then the game ran a little slower everywhere else. Luckily, Godot has a feature for this, called Project Setting Overrides. In your project settings, you can override a specific setting for a specific target. So I added an override for Android, which would disable batching. I also submitted a bug report so they can duplicate and perhaps fix the degradation in a future version. So the next bottleneck I hit was with creature rendering, where I noticed if I had too many creatures, Android slowed down a lot. Creatures are made up of a whole bunch of different parts that are mashed together, about 40 or 50 different sprites, each with different shaders to recolor them appropriately. I tried disabling those special shaders, thinking my shader code might suck, but it was still slow. And then I tried getting rid of the sprites entirely, so it didn't have to render anything, and surprisingly it was still slow. The one thing that sped it up was removing this torso polygon, this oval piece in the middle of the creature that grows as they get fatter. It needs to be rendered at real time so that the creature can grow and shrink, and it's the one polygon they have. Turning that polygon off sped up Android performance by about 120%. Why was it so hard to render one polygon? It turns out there's a bug report for this already, and it's already been fixed. But the bad thing is, the fix is implemented by the GLES3 and GLES2 batching support that I had to disable to get the game running better on Android. So with batching on, the game runs like crap on Android because it can't handle all the sprites. With batching off, the game runs like crap on Android because it can't render a polygon. I experimented with a best of both worlds approach where I'd cache the polygon to a sprite, that way Android could render a sprite every frame instead of a polygon. But the caching process took a little bit of time, so I had to add a lot of logic for things like only cache the polygon sometimes, if the creature changes directions or grows or shrinks in size. It introduced a lot of bugs, it slowed things down for targets other than Android, and even on Android, it could slow things down if you just change directions too often or in certain edge cases. I ended up just not merging this, it was too unreliable and didn't provide enough benefit. I'm optimistic that in a few months, they'll figure out the problems with GLES3 batching on Android, and all this might be a non-issue anyway. The last major Android bottleneck I noticed was the Overworld Shader, the thing that generates these pretty white ripples that make the frosting look sort of gloopy. It made things run pretty chunky on my Samsung Galaxy Note 9. Getting rid of this was more complicated than just turning off a shader, because all the Overworld sprites were done in this red-green palette so that I could easily swap out the colors if I wanted to have different areas later. Without the shader, that had to go. So I re-rendered the sprites with the Overworld colors I have right now. I'll have to have a different set for each area in the game. That's not a big deal. And with that change, the game ran much smoother on Android, but without the Overworld ripples, it looked a little plain. I wanted to substitute them with something, even if it wouldn't look quite as cool. So I thought I'd do a sprite-based solution. I made a 1-tile-wide ripple sprite, and drew it in such a way that I could connect a lot of these in a line to render a long wave. Then I wrote some logic for spawning these at one end of the tile map and having them slowly crawl to the other side, speeding up and slowing down with some sinusoidal arithmetic. The result looks alright. I think the old shader looked cooler, but this fixes a few problems with it. The waves no longer creep down the hanging goop at the edges of the level, and most importantly, it's snappy enough to run anywhere. So about a month or two ago, someone running the web version of TurboFat ran into a problem where they noticed it was only using one of their cores. It was not splitting the load across their various cores, and I didn't know how to fix it then, but during the Stop Waiting for Godot game jam, someone did casually mention like, hey, by the way, you could turn on multi-threaded HTML export. And I was like, oh, I could? Well, let's try it. So I tried this for TurboFat. You can't quite turn it on, and the reason why you can't is there are some security concerns where web servers have to enable two specific settings, this cross-origin opener policy and cross-origin embedder policy. And if the server doesn't have those settings on, your multi-threaded game cannot be run on their servers. And itch.io does not have these on. So I can't turn this on for TurboFat, but maybe someday, we'll see. So I'd often noticed a subtle jitter effect when a new creature got loaded during a puzzle when you broke your combo. And I had some ideas for how to fix it, but they were all pretty complicated. But then this month, when I was doing all my performance testing, I was often turning off VSync temporarily just to uncap the frame rate so that I could measure performance improvements more accurately. But I noticed that with VSync off, these little jitters from the creatures getting loaded were a lot subtler. So I thought I should just leave VSync off all the time. This is great. And someone immediately sort of noticed and said, well, how do I turn VSync back on? And I was like, why do you want to turn it back on? And they pointed out, well, when the game's running at like the maximum frames per second, because VSync is off, it's also chewing out the maximum amount of my GPU, which is bad. So I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Sure, I can't do that. So I struck a compromise sort of. And the first compromise is, yeah, you can turn it on and off freely. It starts off by default, because I think most people will want it off, but you can turn it back on if you want VSync. The second thing is you can cap the frame rate in Godot. So you can say, I want my game to run at a maximum of 120 frames a second. But with those two things and with VSync off, man, the game just feels so much smoother. I really like playing it a lot more now that doesn't feel that jitter. You know, it's subtle, but it really got to me. So I made one other fix which really cuts down on jitter, and that's that I have this resource cache that I already made like 6 months ago because I noticed that loading the puzzle scene and other scenes like that were pretty slow. It had to load all the images, all the different monsters and stuff, and that took a few seconds, but by caching it, it would just load it in memory and be like, boop, here it is. So I was already caching all of my images, scenes, sound files, scripts, all that stuff is cached in memory, but then the logic for loading up a creature and configuring it, it wasn't using that cache. And a lot of other parts of my game weren't using that cache. They were all having to load that stuff from scratch. So by wiring those two things together and just saying everything in my game now uses this cache, oh man, it's so much faster in a lot of different ways, including loading creatures during puzzles. Also, a few gameplay improvements. Now during a squish move, the game will buffer any left or right inputs, and after the squish move completes, it'll apply them. So that lets you do some pretty cool moves at higher speeds that you couldn't do before. Second of all, Twitch streamer Princess Momo13 realized that these V pieces didn't quite climb the same way J and L pieces did, and so I've changed their kick table so they will climb up ledges instead of just shoving themselves to the side. And lastly, the same guy pointed out with top outs, it wasn't clearing enough of your screen, so it was still like 2/3 full after you topped out. So it was like, how is this really helping me recover, right? So now it clears away a little more. So when Princess Momo13 on Twitch was trying out my game, there were a few levels where they beat them, and they were like, they got a master rank, and they were like, master rank, that was it? I can get higher than that. That wasn't even very hard. So the game grades you by comparing your score to my best score, because usually my best scores are okay, but now other people have started beating my scores. The bar needs to be raised, but I don't know how high. I don't have his scores, and I don't know how he got those scores. So to facilitate that, I've added 2 buttons to the game. One is if you're playing on the desktop, there's now an open user folder button where you can get your save data, and you can look at this yourself and see like, oh, cool, what's in there? Oh, wow, it saves all that. That's awesome. And if you send me this, then I'll have your high scores, and I can put them in the game, so it'll grade people against your cool scores. The other button I've added is because that button won't work for Chrome and Firefox. They save their stuff somewhere else, and that button just doesn't work. I tried it. So copy to clipboard will copy all of your save data into the clipboard, and you can throw it in a paste bin and send it to me. And either way, then I can get your scores and put them in the game. And then instead of people having to race against my crappy scores once they're not good anymore, once you guys all surpass me, you guys can race against each other, and I'll put whoever's doing the best in here, and they can be the new master rank. So that's where we're at after October. The game is running so much faster now, night and day. Next month, though, I want to start on the replacement for story mode. The new mode where you'll start at like level 1 and you like climb up as high as you can get, and then you start over next time. I think it'll be really fun. Give people a challenge if they're veterans, give people more content at their level if they're noobs. It'll be something for everybody. So the other thing though is I do want to start setting aside some scheduled time to work on Frog Finder alongside TurboFat. Not much, but it just needs something. I need some time that I'm working on it. Something like every other Thursday and Friday or something like that. But either way, hope to have some new cool content for you next month. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you try out the game. I'm really curious what you guys think. Take it easy.